Senator from Maine.
Mr. President, first I ask unanimous consent that the following senators be permitted to speak prior to the scheduled roll call vote. Myself for up to 15 minutes, Senator Wyden for up to 10 minutes, Senator Ernst for up to 10 minutes, Senator Cassidy for up to 5 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to calendar number 203, SJ Res 82.
Clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 203, Senate Joint Resolution 82, providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title V United States Code of the rules submitted by the Office of the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services relating to policy on adhering to the text of the Administrative Procedure Act.
Mr. President, this is a nonpartisan CRA, which doesn't happen around here all that often. This is basically just public participation in good government. When the Administrative Procedure Act was passed in 1947, the Department of Health and Human Services didn't exist. And for about a dozen years, it didn't have much in the way of responsibility. And so it was exempt from the provisions of the Administrative Procedure Act that apply to public comment and public input on significant decisions in agencies that apply throughout the federal government. In the early 70s, Elliot Richardson, who was President Nixon's Secretary of Health and Human Services, issued a waiver of the exemption. I realize it's a little contorted, but basically what he found was that the role of the Health and Human Services Department was vastly expanded after Medicare, Medicaid, and the other responsibilities that have been placed in that department. So he said, in effect, we will be subject to the Administrative Procedure Act, and we'll notice the major activities that we're going to do to the public, and we'll allow public comment. It's not a veto, it's just a simple transparency of here's what our rule, or here's what our activity is going to entail, and allow the public to comment. And that's been the law for 54 years, through 6 Republican presidents, including Ronald Reagan and the first administration of Donald Trump. In March of this year, Secretary Kennedy chose to repeal this waiver, this rule that was adopted 54 years ago, and close the processes of the Department of Health and Human Services to the public, and essentially obscure activities that they were making, so the public only learned about them after they happened. There was no opportunity, there was no notice, and there was no opportunity for the public to comment. So we're not really talking about politics here. We're not talking about Democrats and Republicans. We're just talking about a fundamental rule of how our government works in an effort to be in touch with the public, to allow them to know what's going on in these important decisions and to have a role. Now, it's ironic because Secretary Kennedy, in his confirmation hearing, used a term that frankly I had never heard before, but he used it repeatedly: radical transparency. He said, we're going to have radical transparency. And we went back and looked. He used the term transparency something like 100 times in his response to questions, either in his hearing or in his written responses. This was a basic premise of what he presented to the Congress in his path to confirmation. This is the opposite of radical transparency. It's radical obfuscation. It's a deliberate action. He had to take an action to rescind this, what had been the rule for the Department of Human Services, as I say, for 54 years under presidents of both parties and different administrations. And what we're really talking about is simply allowing the public to know what these proposed actions will be and ability to comment. What's wrong with that? What's objectionable about that? It doesn't slow things down appreciably. It's not a huge impediment to executive action. And we're not talking about emergency actions. We're talking about fundamental policy decisions being made by the department. Now, here's what we're talking about. Basically, it's called the Richardson Waiver, and it was the waiver of the exemption of the department that was in the original Administrative Procedure Act. by rescinding it, which is what they did, the CRA that we're talking about today would rescind the rescission. It would basically overturn the decision of the Secretary to close the processes of the department to the public. So it basically says the public can't weigh in. And again, we're not talking about a veto or some extraordinary opportunity for things to be obstructed. We're just notice and comment. I mean, that's sort of the basic process of our administrative work that we do here in Washington. So no ability of people to weigh in on major health care policy changes. He reorganized the entire department without any notice, without any studies or analysis or public notice of what they were doing and why. Clearly, the executive can make changes in the staffing arrangements and that kind of thing. They can work on how to organize their departments, but there should be some, when it's a wholesale reorganization, there should be some notice of here's what we're going to do, here's the basis, here's the study we've done, here's why we need these jobs, we don't need these jobs. None of that happened after the rescission of this rule. And there was no public comment, there was no public input on really a fundamental reorganization of one of the most important, the second largest department that we have in the United States government. HHS reduction in force and mass firings. Tremendous changes in the organization and the ability of this department created by the Congress to meet the needs of the people that the Congress had in mind when they funded these programs and created this agency. They canceled thousands of grants and billions of dollars of research funds. Again, without any notice, without any opportunity to comment, just gone, including, believe it or not, research into Alzheimer's, research into some of the most serious diseases that we have in this country that are ravaging our people, cutting off research. Again, if that's what they're going to do, they should do it, but they should let the people know that they're doing it and why. And allow people to say, no, no, we think this is important. We think this area is particularly important, just to have the input. To do it arbitrarily and behind closed doors and with no notice and no opportunity for people to have input is a disservice to the American people. And that's what this has done. Thousands of grants, billions of dollars, and I'm talking about like $11 billion in medical research. Imagine what might be in that research that's now been canceled. And people were in clinical trials canceled. That's one of the most, I believe, one of the most important functions of the federal government is research and supporting research. And here we are canceling this with no notice, no opportunity for people to comment. Another point, appoint members of important advisory committees with no public input. In the past, there was public input. There was a notice posted that we're going to appoint these advisory committees and we're going to and come forward, make nominations, give us names. None of that happened. And we all know that there have been some pretty questionable decisions recently by these purged advisory committees. So again, this is good government. This isn't an attack on Secretary Kennedy, on President Trump. This is just getting us to the place where the public has some input and knowledge of these major decisions that are being made that affect the health and welfare of the people of the United States. So I hope that we can have a bipartisan vote on this today, because again, this is just a sort of wonky process vote, but it protects the public's ability to know what's going on in one of the most important departments in our government and to have a chance to have a little say in those decisions. So I hope that we can have a significant bipartisan vote today. I think this will make a difference. I think it will help the country. I don't think it will hamstring the department or the secretary in any way, and it will, in fact, improve the health and welfare of the people of the United States. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Senator Morgan.
I want to tell my colleague it's been pleasure to work with him on this. And what you have said is so eloquent. I'm going to be very brief and just make one point. What you want to make sure is the American people aren't in the dark with respect to important health issues. You want them to be able to comment. You want them to be able to weigh in. And I think that's extraordinarily important. And the reason it's needed is earlier this year, Robert Kennedy took the unprecedented step of doing away with that and basically taking away that right to comment on matters that are so important to them. From day one of his tenure at HHS, he's gone to great lengths to upend public health and erode the safeguards that have been in place for decades to keep kids and seniors and families safe and healthy. He's fired thousands of scientists, health professionals, and staff in charge of the health and well-being of kids and families. And one of the things that I appreciated your mentioning is the roots of this, the roots of the Richardson Waiver are with Republicans. This was not some plot by a bunch of people for ideological reasons on the other side of the political spectrum. This was a basic proposition of making sure that people had a say in the healthcare policies that the federal government enacts. And I would just say to my friend, back in my days when I was director of the Great Panthers, I know my colleague was with Legal Aid, we thought the right to participate was just about as fundamental as you can get. And doing away with that makes it a lot easier to undermine science and healthcare in America and make every one of us less safe. And under the rule change that's being talked about, it's all being done for reasons of secrecy. Since Kennedy's repeal of the Richardson Waiver, HHS has abruptly and arbitrarily canceled hundreds of millions of dollars of previously approved public health funding. The Secretary has announced a major reorganization of its department, resulting in fewer health experts at HHS. And without the Richardson safeguard in place, it seems to me we'll have a government that's emboldened to move forward with sweeping rules about vaccines without input from the public. Robert Kennedy and my colleague touched on this, promised radical transparency. We had the confirmation hearing in the Senate Finance Committee. So the promise was for radical transparency. What looks like what we got, to me, I'd say to my colleague, is radical secrecy. Instead of throwing open the doors of government, what's happened is the gates have been shut and the key has been thrown away. So the resolution that you are introducing today makes sure that the American people get their voice back. And on what I think is the most important issue, which is health. And I've visited with my colleague before on this. I've always felt the most important issue is health. Because if you and your loved ones don't have their health, everything else goes by the board. And what you're doing with this important resolution is giving Americans a say in the future direction of their own health. You're giving them the power to speak up about this crusade against health care and the power to speak out against the policies that are making them less safe. I come to the floor today to say that this is a thoroughly nonpartisan CRA. You look at this and the language and what you're trying to do and how you've described it on the floor has really drained some of the ugly partisanship out of an important debate. You said this comes down, as I said earlier, let's make sure the American people aren't in the dark. I urge my colleagues to vote for transparency, to vote for the right to weigh in on these health care issues, and I yield the floor.